Welcome to the Food Allergy Institute. I'm your host, Subha Chudgar. In this episode, we will be discussing the recent news surrounding food labels, followed by a discussion with Melissa Grzybalski, an expert in this field. Later, we'll hear from one of our remission patients who can now eat whatever they want, whenever they want, without the fear of an allergic reaction.
A tough new food labeling law aimed at protecting people with sesame allergies seems to have backfired. Some companies are increasing the number of products with sesame.
In the first episode of this series, Dr. Inderpal Randhawa discussed a landmark decision in the world of food allergies. As of January 2023, the FDA had officially announced that sesame would be considered the 9th major food allergy, joining the likes of peanut, egg, milk, and fish amidst a growing allergic population. With this announcement, it was assumed that food manufacturers would also update their food labels, noting whether or not their product contained traces of sesame. But instead, some companies have made things even more complicated for those allergic to the newly appointed allergen. According to an article in the Wall Street Journal, some food manufacturers are having trouble labeling food items that contain sesame. Since cross-contamination is likely to occur, these manufacturers are opting to add "may contain sesame" on food labels rather than updating their equipment in order to ensure safe eating for those who are allergic. To quote the article, "The law's rocky implementation has highlighted how sometimes even uncontroversial legislation can lead to unintended consequences, in this case, raising risks for those whom the law was aimed at helping." But that's not all. There have been multiple reports of people who suffer from sesame allergies that can no longer eat at restaurants they once considered safe. In another article by Business Insider, they note, instead of following regulatory guidelines for preventing cross-contamination of sesame in food facilities, these companies, such as Wendy's and Olive Garden, are adding sesame flour to items because that process is easier and less expensive than guaranteeing a contaminant-free product. However, restaurant chains say they're at the mercy of their suppliers, which are adding sesame flour to products instead of taking steps to prevent cross-contamination in their facilities. Many families are taking offense to this, now having lost a safe space to eat. When we come back, we will continue this important discussion with Melissa Grzybalski, an expert in the field of food labeling. We'll be right back. I'm here with Melissa Grzybalski, the president of the Food Consulting Company, a major overseer of food labeling and regulatory compliance for food manufacturers and distributors. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, it's great to be with you today.
Good to see you. I think the big question we want to start off with is what was the original purpose of the food label historically?
Sure. So U.S. government food regulation goes back to 1906 with the first Food and Drug Acts, which was really centered around consumer protection and dealt primarily with food adulteration and food safety. So for example, products like fruit jams were being sold and they didn't really contain much fruit. It was mostly water and sugar and colorings. There was issues in the meat packing industry with really unsanitary conditions. And then it was kind of a wild west of added chemicals used as preservatives. So that was kind of the start of when food labeling became a thing in the US.
And I guess we would assume that the food label protects the consumers. So who does the food label protect, the consumer or the manufacturer?
That's a good question. So through the years, those regulations have kind of evolved to and been revised to kind of meet the changing needs of our food system, right? So that's gone through a lot of different things, from adding nutrition facts labeling to allergen labeling, which we'll talk more about today. These laws are really intended to protect consumers, but FDA also takes into consideration comments and feedback from all stakeholders, and those also include the food industry. So they'll have a way to kind of comment and address how food labeling regulations impact manufacturers and distributors, the ones that are doing that labeling and manufacturing of our food products.
Melissa, tell me, what is the current role of the food label in today's market?
So food labels are really a standard component of all retail foods that are sold in today's market. So companies who distribute food must really have an understanding of the federal and state labeling requirements that are needed for foods.
And what happens if a company knowingly omits something from their label or mislabels something?
Sure. So FDA requires that manufacturers provide truthful and accurate label information. Now, FDA does not have a label approval process, so manufacturers are just responsible for meeting those regulatory requirements on their own. In my experience, manufacturers generally want to follow the regulations and be compliant and provide, trustworthy and transparent labeling for their customers. If a mistake is made and an ingredient is not included on the label of the product, then the manufacturer would be responsible for changing the label. And that could be done sometimes like with a sticker that gets, put over the existing label, or if the ingredient were to be an allergen, then the product is really a risk for consumers. So the company would likely issue a recall, and either FDA could initiate that or the manufacturer. FDA considers foods that contain an allergen and aren't labeled properly to be misbranded or adulterated. And FDA can issue those recalls or even like an import refusal if they're a product that's coming into the country, and then could seize the products as well. So manufacturers also have a risk of like class action lawsuits or related to mislabeling too. So it's not really good business practice to recall products and mislabel allergens or to be put on like an import alert. So a lot, manufacturers have those good food safety processes in place, and we call those current good manufacturing processes or GMPs. And there's also a regulatory requirement for companies to follow current GMPs. So that includes allergen control procedures as well.
So not a very specific overseer, but there is definitely an interest by the manufacturer to make sure that those labels are correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move on to sesame. Why did sesame get added to the FDA's list of allergens recently? Tell me a little bit about that.
So Congress passed the Food Allergen Labeling and Consumer Protection Act back in 2004. So that was the first law that required allergens to be labeled on food products. And that law identified 8 major food allergens. So milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, and soybeans. And at that time, those 8 allergens accounted for about 90% of food allergies and serious allergic reactions in the US. Now, in April of 2021, the Food Allergy Safety, Treatment, Education and Research Act, or the acronym it goes by is the FASTER Act. So that was signed into law in 2021, declaring sesame as the 9th major food allergen in the US. And so FDA does monitor reports of food allergic reactions and food hypersensitivities through their FDA consumer complaint system. So they're working on guidance for FDA staff in figuring out how any other allergens outside of those current 9 now would be evaluated and possibly added to the list. So we're at 9 currently, and there may be future allergens that could be listed.
How do you think manufacturers could get around the regulations that are put in place to make sure that the right foods are listed as ingredients?
In my experience, manufacturers want to be successful and follow the regulations generally. It's not a good business practice to have products like recalled or held up in U.S. Customs. So there are cases where manufacturers don't understand the rules or maybe other cases where the rules are a little bit gray and it's hard to navigate how to handle things without really clear guidance. As it relates to allergens, one scenario is supplemental allergen labeling. So those are like may contain statements. The FALCPA rules don't dictate how manufacturers need to label with like may contain traces of wheat or processed in a facility that contains milk. So manufacturers kind of need to determine how to label those supplemental allergens. And so if, as an example, a cookie manufacturer uses a really small amount of baking powder in the formula, and then baking powder has that supplemental statement on it that says may contain milk. Well, what's the threshold of, when should that supplemental allergen statement be carried over into the finished cookie product? And so it's a little bit of a gray area there. And I would say that generally it's not so much trying to get around regulations, but rather like figuring out how to navigate the regulations.
And our hope is that manufacturers don't do this, but what are some of the repercussions if a manufacturer does happen to skirt around the regulations?
So kind of the same as I mentioned previously, FDA considers foods that contain an allergen that aren't labeled properly to be misbranded or adulterated. And so FDA can issue recalls, those import refusals and seizure. And again, the manufacturer is also at risk for class action lawsuits from customers related to mislabeling. So there's definitely risk in not following the rules, and especially as it relates to allergen labeling and safety for consumers.
So how can parents of children with allergies, food allergies, how can they successfully read these food labels to make sure that their children aren't consuming exactly what they're allergic to?
Reading the food label every time you buy the food is really important. And formulas change, and especially since COVID and the Ukraine war, there have been some ingredient shortages. So what I see with my clients is they're now finding they have problems sourcing the exact same ingredients all the time. And so it's really important to kind of keep an eye on those labels, because manufacturers are having to make some changes to formulas that would be reflected in that ingredient statement. And on occasion, sometimes those allergens are affected too. Another way to kind of keep an eye out on allergen labeling is that the sesame allergen labeling rule, like we talked about, was just finalized in January of this year. And so there's going to be a little bit of lag time. So it's hard to say when all of those like pre-2023 foods are going to make it all the way through the supply chain, off of grocery store shelves, out of homes. And so just keeping an eye out and being aware of that piece as well.
And just to be very specific about it, there's always that little line in the bottom that says may contain traces. When a parent reads that and their children has a food allergy to, let's say, peanuts or sesame, and it says may contain traces, should they assume that that food is not safe for their child? Or what is the amount that's in there that is in that trace?
Sure. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that trace amount is not well defined. And so my best advice is to avoid any of those may contain products, especially with an anaphylactic type reaction. And I know that there's folks that have different levels of, reactions to allergens. And so sometimes it's a very case by case scenario in terms of the allergy risk for different folks. And like I said, that is one of the challenges for manufacturers, is there's not a specific level defined for any of that, like supplemental type statement. And so manufacturers are doing the best they can with their current good manufacturing processes, like I mentioned before, and really try to carry over that supplemental statement when they really can't control those allergies, either like in the facility or from their ingredient suppliers. So if they're producing something in the same facility as another allergen, they're required to, do the washing down and cleaning in between production runs and all of that. But at the end of the day, if it's in your factory, it can be hard to 100% guarantee that there won't be any cross-contamination.
Thank you for clarifying that. I know that's always an issue. In your experience, do you feel like people are spending a lot more time reading these labels more carefully than in years past?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see people more engaged and interested in what is in food more than ever before. Absolutely.
I think also because of, the rise in food allergies, it's something that they're definitely paying attention to. Are there other interesting trends that you can see in relation to food labeling, safety, that consumers should know about?
Yes. So related to allergy labeling, I think companies are more interested in making allergen-free products and working with, say, like outside certifiers to have a kind of added layer of credibility to their labeling. So working towards formulations that can be geared towards those allergenic consumers to say, this is milk-free, this is peanut-free. Other areas of interest in the food labeling and regulatory world right now are front of pack nutrition labeling that FDA is kind of working on. And now there's some different rules for labeling plant-based milk alternatives and meat alternatives. So that's kind of the fun and exciting stuff in my world right now.
I do have one kind of personal question, but I think it should help for other people as well. But let's say an ingredient is not listed in the list of ingredients and someone does get an allergic reaction. How many times does that need to happen in order for a company to like issue a recall or, just to basically take it off or relabel the product in itself?
I might have to listen to your question again. So
Sorry. I'm just wondering if someone does have a reaction to a negative reaction, food allergy patient to a product. How many times, does that happen to, like if someone eats something's not labeled properly, they get an allergic reaction. Let's say they make a complaint. Does the manufacturer kind of have to log all of that in and they get a tally as the number of complaints that they receive and then they kind of make changes to their food labeling? I'm just wondering how that works when parents with food allergies, because I feel like they're the ones that are going to be watching this. They want to make sure that they're feeding their kids the safe thing and the thing that doesn't have what their kid is allergic to. So how do you kind of navigate that if a company is producing something, they have all the ingredients listed, but somebody still gets an allergic reaction? Do they have to keep track of that, those food companies?
Well, I'll kind of speak to that in terms of my experience working for a large manufacturer. So the food manufacturer themselves, if the parent were to contact them, they typically have, customer support folks that would take those issues and complaints and then pass them along to the appropriate team. So if a customer is saying, we ate this, we have an allergy to peanut, there's not peanut listed on the label, but my child had a reaction, we think it might be from this product. So then the manufacturer would, talk through the whole the process with the food safety team to say, okay, do we feel like there's an ingredient in here that hasn't been labeled, or is there an ingredient in here that may have a cross-contamination risk for peanut that maybe we haven't seen or included on the label? And so there's definitely some internal assessment that would happen. There's also FDA's reporting form for food allergies. And so FDA would take that complaint and then address that. I can't say, I don't know for sure if FDA has a threshold or how many complaints. I assume that it's one complaint where they would, take a look at it and see, allergens are really something that are taken seriously by both FDA and the manufacturer. Of course, there's always considerations with what other foods did the person eat at the same time. Just one incident does not necessarily mean, causation. It was this specific this food product. But I will say that my experience in the food industry has been that, any of those allergic reaction customer experiences would definitely be treated seriously and cause, like a assessment of all the ingredients that are in the product along with how the product is labeled.
Thank you for I just wanted you to indulge me on that. But I also wanted to ask you, is there going to be kind of an adjustment period now that sesame has been added as an official food allergen for ingredients? Should parents kind of have a little bit of caution when reading labels because manufacturers are still trying to catch up with adding that as an ingredient?
There will be lag time, like I mentioned before. There's going to be products that are still on store, especially shelf stable products that sometimes have a 1 to 2 year shelf life. Those that the label was actually put on them at the manufacturing site didn't have to be labeled until January 1st of 2023. So it could be a couple of years out that those will be on shelves and in cupboards and stuff. So yes, there is some lag time and similar to what we saw after the first allergen laws were put in place, that there's just some lag time for that.
Is there anything else that parents should be looking out for when it comes to food labels in kind of this area of this new age of food labeling and allergies?
Sure. I think one question that I get sometimes is related to the allergen statement or how allergens are stated in the ingredient statement. And there's two ways that companies can be compliant. So they can either list the allergen within the listing of ingredients, or they can include it in a separate contain statement at the end. I think we often see those contain statements, but not always. So just because a food product doesn't have a contain statement at the end of the ingredient statement doesn't mean there's not allergens. So be sure to be reading through those ingredient statements all the time. And the contain statement is supposed to match those ingredients that are allergens. But like with sesame, for example, the contain statement might not have sesame yet as we go through this lag time. So always be reading those ingredient statements on food packages.
Melissa, where can parents go if they have any more questions or concerns in regards to food allergies and labels?
Sure. FDA has a good website that not only helps the food manufacturers that I work with on allergen labeling, but they do have consumer information as well related to all aspects of food labeling, including allergens. So that's a good spot to go.
All right. Thank you so much, Melissa, for joining us today and giving us all this great information.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Peter. I'm the lab manager for the exclusive laboratory that supports a tolerance induction program for the Food Allergy Institute. So the first part is we provide blood draw services, and what makes us different is that we don't rush you to get out. We don't have a waiting room full of people in line trying to do that. Your time is your time, and we're going to take as much care as possible to get your child the best experience that we can. Number two is in the laboratory, we strive ourselves on quality of our work. So we're not trying to push data through, push test results just to get it done. We want to make sure that everything that we do is at the highest quality. With over 200 allergens hosted in-house, we have the most diverse allergen menu in the world. Over 30% of these allergens are for component testing, which identify the specific proteins in a food one is allergic to. Component testing is important in laboratory diagnostics because it allows us to pinpoint specific proteins that comprise whole allergens, such as peanuts or milk. Not many laboratories have component testing available on their test menu. The diagnostic lab here carries over 60 different component allergens, to which 9 are exclusive to us and a very small handful of laboratories in the world. The laboratory caters to the Food Allergy Institute exclusively, which means that we are able to provide all the different combination of tests required to make this program a success. My favorite part of the job is actually working with patients and their families. Most times working in a laboratory, you're stuck behind a desk. But here, we get a direct connection with them, which makes us care so much more about what we do.
I'd like to thank Melissa Grzybowski for joining us today and sharing such important information surrounding food labeling. We also encourage you to visit our website, www.foodallergyinstitute.com, to learn more about our program and to see if it's right for your family and to view resources related to today's topic. For even more resources, I'd like to direct your attention towards Snack Safely, Founded in 2011, Snack Safely provides straightforward, actionable information to improve the lives of 34 million Americans coping with food allergies and celiac disease. They strive to eliminate accidental exposure by leveraging their online properties to educate, advocate, and connect the allergic community with products and services that help achieve this goal. As vocal advocates for the causes, legislation, research, and reforms that benefit individuals with food allergies, snacksafely.com is one of a handful of organizations recognized, respected, and referred to by the food allergy community, as well as school districts nationwide seeking to accommodate their students with food allergies. Visit www.snacksafely.com for more information. Before we end our show, I would like to introduce you to one of the patients at the Food Allergy Institute who have recently reached remission and can now eat whatever they want, whenever they want, without the fear of an allergic reaction. For the Food Allergy Institute, I'm Subha Chudgar. Thanks for watching.
My name is Hayden Lichtenstein. I'm from Los Angeles, California, and I love to play sports in my free time, watch all types of sports, and I play basketball for school. So I was allergic to eggs, all nuts, so including tree nuts and peanuts, and mustard. And I first found out that I was allergic to eggs when I was just 9 months old. I had a piece of a pancake that contained some eggs in it, and my face swelled up and I had an allergic reaction. So life was pretty rough. I had to avoid a lot of foods. I had to live in fear of an allergic reaction. I couldn't do normal kid activities. I couldn't eat at restaurants. At birthday parties, I always had to bring my own food, my own dessert. And there was always a constant reminder of just to be careful of eating certain foods. I remember going to baseball games. I used to love going to Dodger games, and just all the peanuts there, I would always just get an itchy throat, maybe get hives. And so just going to just activities that I'd love to do just made it hard. It affected my confidence, just eating out, like going on sleepovers, going to school, going on field trips. Kind of just like not being with my parents kind of scared me, because even if the case there was an allergic reaction, I wouldn't know what to do. It kind of just affected my ability to live. So the first year in the program was definitely a little scary. I remember just thinking like, why is this doctor different from all the other doctors? And like, why should I eat the food that I've been told my whole life that could harm me or even kill me? And so it was definitely scary having to eat all these foods. But I think once I started to like learn more about this program and how it's different and why it stands out, I became more confident and I became excited to eat these foods, because knowing what the final result would be. Comparing my 10-year-old self to my current self now, I think I was just living in fear. And now I don't have to live in fear anymore. I can eat anywhere I want, anything I want. I never have to ask about ingredients, cross-contamination. I can go to birthday parties, I can go to restaurants, I can go to sporting events, I can travel. I'm just excited just to live freely without in fear. I think one piece of advice I'd give to my 10-year-old self would probably be just to, enjoy like the process. I mean, it's kind of funny to say, but I think nowhere else in the world they're doing this. I think it's just truly like amazing how I was able to eat these foods that I never imagined being able to. And I think just seeing how far I've come, I think it's just truly remarkable.